Welcome back to the Carrot and Stick podcast, a podcast series focused on helping sales managers and sales leaders to level up so they can have more impact in their role. Today, I'm talking to Hitesh Kapadia, the co-founder and CRO of Jointflows. Previously, he also used to work as a global director of sales for Yieldify, and prior to that had a long career in sales, about 14 or 15 years. We have a really good conversation today around different managerial styles, around managing career progression and expectations within your team, and also go through a pretty hot button topic in the form of AE self-sourcing. Should account executives in software sales be sourcing their own deals, or should they only be working deals that is given to them? Always a fun one, as well as a couple of stories to round up and some recommendations of influencers that you can follow on LinkedIn to get the kind of content that he absolutely loves consuming. He's a really interesting guy. I'm sure you'll absolutely love his down-to-earth nature. Without further ado, let's get into the podcast. It's Hitesh. Hitesh, absolute pleasure to have you on, mate. Thank you so much for giving us the time today. Now, you and I probably actually aren't super acquainted, right? A lot of other guests that I've had on before, I know personally through years of working together or just being in close proximity. Yeah. Not just for myself, but also for the guests out there as well. Do you want to give us a quick run through about you, about your background, your experience as a sales leader and sales manager?
Yeah, sure. So I am Hitesh, or Hitesh Kapadia. I'm currently the co-founder and CRO of a company called Jointflows. Prior to that, I was at a company called Yieldify, who were acquired by Publicis Group at the turn of the year, so in January of 2023. Over there, I spent about 5 years over there, ultimately leading the sales team globally for the company as well. Prior to that, I was at a company called Profitero, who were a relatively early stage startup in e-commerce analytics, who were actually coincidentally also acquired by Publicis Group after I had left. So there's a bit of a theme over there.
Is that where Jointflows is going then, you think, one day?
I wouldn't say no. I haven't quite mapped it out, but
now you're a co-founder, you take it.
Yeah, I'll take it. Absolutely. And I've basically just had a career in sales, to be honest. Starting off at GlaxoSmithKline through to Procter & Gamble and moving in towards tech, where I started working at IRI, then over to Profitero, and I've given you the rest of the background already. But it's great to be here.
No worries, mate. Thank you. And I've got to ask the obvious question, because you said you're a founder. What does Jointflows do? How well can you sell your product?
So Jointflows is a revenue execution platform. We're effectively, if you had to really dumb it down, we are a project management tool for revenue teams. Ultimately, what we realized in particular when we were at Yieldify, so one of my co-founders actually is from Yieldify as well, and actually used to be my manager over there. But what we had realized is there was a lot of manual orchestration when it came to deal management. And working in a manual way with all team members working in different ways as well, it was really difficult to be able to be predictable. And so where the project management piece comes through it is we ultimately help to reduce inefficiencies, improve predictability, and start to help you to achieve your revenue targets through automation. So workflow automation, orchestration, and efficient team alignment as well.
Got it. That's where the flows part comes in, then around that automation piece, right?
Exactly.
Love it. Awesome. Cool. Thank you for the intro. The three topics that you kind of gave us to go through today were managerial styles, career progression, which I think is such a big one all the time when SDRs, and even for those of our listeners that are in recruitment, for example, when their consultants are asking, how can I get to being a senior, for example, it's quite a big one. And then a really hot button topic, which is account executive self-sourcing or AE self-sourcing. An ongoing debate in SaaS that I think we're all used to by now of should AE self-source, or are they there to close deals, negotiate them, manage them, so on and so forth. So let's start at the very top then. Managerial styles. No one else has said that to me really before. Talk to me about what you mean when you say managerial styles.
So I think through my career in sales, I've been very fortunate to have experienced many different types of managers, different types of leaders. I myself as well, once I became a manager and a leader, tried different things as well. I didn't necessarily know what's going to work. I think it's true that just because you're a top performer within your previous role, it doesn't mean you're going to be the best at what you do. So, being a top performer in AE doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a great leader. And so I had to try a few things. And for me, what I found worked really well is leading by example. To give you an example, we used to do dial day at my last company. And that effectively is a day which is carved out for all SDRs and all AEs to spend nothing but on the phones. You spend the whole day on the phones. And it's not a concept I introduced. Like Dial Day was there before I became the manager as well. However, it wasn't always the case that the team leader or the manager is also going to be doing Dial Day as well. And I wouldn't say that cold calling is my strongest skill, but being there in the trenches with the troops, as it were, I think it goes a long way. Being able to look up and see that, for the SDRs firstly, to be able to look up and say, hey, actually my AE is actually doing these dials with me side by side, in the same room together. And then for them to all look up at me, for example, and say, hey, actually he's doing them as well. And, he's putting himself out there because, as I said, I don't necessarily think I'm the best at cold calls. And I think that it's something that people struggle with to do. Generally speaking, it can be an uncomfortable activity. And so for people to see someone who's in my position at the time, be willing to put myself forward as and doing something that I'm not necessarily the best at goes a long way. So from a managerial style perspective, for me, it's leading by example is extremely important. I've seen people who have been managers and have been good within their role, but haven't necessarily done the role that they're managing before. And they've been good at it, but then equally I've seen it where it's not been good at it. And where it falls short is when things are not going well, you start to lose a bit of credibility at times. I've seen where people can look up and say, well, hang on, he's telling me to do X, Y, and Z. He's never actually done it himself, or she's never done it herself before.
Yeah.
How can you turn around and tell me? So for me, even though if you actually look, I've never actually been an SDR, right? And so that's why I gave the example of Dial Day, is that, yes, I've never been an SDR. However, I've been around it a lot, but then also I'm willing to do the work side by side with the people as well. And I think that goes a long way.
I've heard that in so many jobs. Like I used to work at McDonald's when I was younger, for example. And the one thing that I remember working in the kitchen, people used to test was when someone would graduate from university, come and work at McDonald's and you get promoted straight to being a manager, not have to do any kitchen work. You're always sat in the back office. And the lack of respect people have because you've got no idea how to cook a burger. You've got no idea how to dress this to make sure the fries are cooked just right. And it sounds that kind of pathetic, but it was like that. That was the sort of level of disrespect or, I guess the evaluation of managers that came in without that. So I'm completely with you. And it's also a bit of a trope, I guess, in sales is that a sales manager, back in my day, I used to make cold calls for fun and book loads of the yellow pages out. And it's like, go on, then make a cold call then. And they're like, now I'll leave you guys to that. And it does become a little bit of a trope after a while, doesn't it? So I completely agree with the whole leading by example piece. I think anything else, it sends that message that you are comfortable being uncomfortable yourself, right? And putting yourself into a position that, what, you didn't come up with doing that role, but you are willing to give it a go and really get in there alongside your team. It's like the whole narrative, a boss tells you what to do, a leader will get in the trenches with you and do it alongside you, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then not just that, I think the other important thing is as a leader, I think it's important that you're open to learning continuously as well. So I have this thing, which is, for any team I've ever managed is there is no such thing as a bad idea. If you have an idea, bring it to the table. If you see that we put a strategy in place, me, anybody else, and it's not working, don't be afraid to put your hands up and say, hey, look, I actually think this can be done better. Right. And then, I've learned things of people, I've learned things of SDRs when I was, global director of sales at Yieldify. Someone who's fresh out of uni has taught me things that I don't know anything about. And so always be open to learning. Once again, in my past, I've had managers who are not open to learning. It's my way or the highway. This is the strategy we've put in play. This is essentially the playbook. This is what we're running with. They're not open to change. And what's wrong with that is by the time they become open to change, it's too late. And because it's pain that's caused the change, right? So, like 80% of people react to pain. So that's the time at which they're happy to react. But by then it's usually too late. By the time you realize there's a problem, it's already too late. And so always be open to change as well, which I think is always important.
And you can end up very tunnel vision to think when you've got lots of experience, as valuable as the experience becomes, you do kind of sometimes forget to take a step back from the coalface and just be like, oh yeah, there's a really obvious way of approaching this that we haven't thought about before. And someone who's never seen this problem before has come in and offered that as a value point. I think is really, really interesting.
Absolutely.
You touched on the whole managerial styles piece. I'm curious to see your take on managing by data or dashboard managers, as people sometimes refer to people as. How do you go about maintaining accountability, consistency, for example, so a sales team can scale well without being the micromanager, the person who's staring at numbers every single day and trying to hound people to make sure they're hitting a certain number.
Yeah, I think that was a little bit of a learning curve for me, to be honest. I mean, I'd like to think I'm good at it now, but when I first went into a managerial role, I was very. So to give you a bit of context, I was a very good performing AE. Like I was very strong at what I did. So when I went into a managerial position, it was very difficult for me to pass control over. Even when we're talking about specific deals, yes, you need to multi-thread. You want to be able to do exec alignments and things like this. But for me, I would almost want to be involved in every step of it. Well, what are you going to do with this deal? What did you say on that call? What's the preparation going to be for this call? Have you thought about the questions you're going to ask on this call? Things like this. And I think that for me, where it came into is, firstly, you need to be able to trust the people in your team, but you need to trust that they are able to deliver based on their skill set. And so what I mean by that, fundamentally for me, when I was managing the team, it's about, right, what are we trying to achieve over here? What do they need to achieve that goal? What skills do they need to be able to have to be able to do that? And where are the gaps? And if there are any gaps, it falls on me to be able to empower them to be able to gain these skills. And if you can tick all of those boxes, then you can trust what they're doing. And yeah, you obviously have to have touch points with your team. You're going to do pipeline reviews. And yeah, they're going to be bigger deals or even complicated deals that you should be involved in, right, as well with your team, and not just as a leader, but then you also want, you might need someone like a technical account manager to join the call, someone in solutions, someone in services. And I think that's good. It paints a picture of a bigger team. You're not buying off one person, but you're buying off a team. So there's nothing wrong with that. But it's being able to trust that they're going to get you involved at the right time. And part of that is through checking in on deal reviews as well. So I wouldn't say I'm no longer that dashboard manager who's constantly, trying to be in the weeds of every little thing that's happening. I think I had a lot more trust in my team.
Good. It's the sort of thing you build up over time. And it's one thing I reflect on is that, a lot of the listeners who tune into this are managers who, for the first time, have really got into a role. They've started building a team and they're just like, right, what the hell do I do? Because so often, like yourself, I guess, in a way, is people get promoted from being an AE or a senior salesperson to being a sales manager. They might get a little bit of training if they're lucky, but then don't necessarily have the real world practice to then take it and say, right, and here's how this actually looks like in reality, right? If you were to give advice, sorry, rather than experience, I can't really give experience. If you were to give advice based on your experience from making that move from A towards being a sales manager, what are the three things that maybe you look back on and say, you know what, I kind of messed that up and I wish I hadn't, and here's how I'd avoid it in the future?
I think I think it's really easy, as I said, to get caught up in the weeds of things when you change role, right? And you almost feel like you're very, very busy, and busy to the point where you don't necessarily have time, or you perceive that you don't have necessarily enough time to be able to upskill and to be able to learn what you need to learn. And there are ways you can do that. So, like I wish, ultimately now I'm in a position where, I've had like mentors within my career for the longest time, but I wouldn't necessarily check in with them at the cadence that I should have. Not maybe necessarily didn't ask them the questions that I should have as well. And I think don't be afraid to leverage your network. When you start to move into a role, in this example, from, a top performing, senior AE or whatever it is into a sales manager role, don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask people who've been there and done that before, people are good at that role, right? Like I know lots of good sales leaders, but for some reason I thought I was too busy to pick up the phone, and reach out to them and say, hey, look, this has just happened. I'm in this situation. What can I do? And it doesn't necessarily mean what they tell you to do is going to be gospel and you need to follow all of that verbatim, word by word. But, then you start to open up your mind a little bit more. And, through the back of that, you start to build your own leadership style as well. So that would be one thing, is don't be afraid to reach into your network, continuing on the path of self-development and upskilling, read. I know you think you're busy, but you can read, you can listen to an Audible, for me, I was
don't scroll TikTok if you can help it.
Don't scroll TikTok. The thing is, like, I would get the train to work, but I would download an episode of something on Netflix or Prime or something and watch that on the train. But there's nothing wrong with doing, because you should have downtime as well. But for me, I think and ultimately I started doing it afterwards, just get a subscription to Audible, right? And if you don't have time to sit there and read a book, or if you don't want to be that guy who's reading a book, then listen to a book, right? Listen to podcasts, find people who are who are good at this. Go on LinkedIn. There's people on LinkedIn who post so regularly who are great operators within this space. Follow them.
And all really
learn
valuable
from them.
advice as well. There's
All
so much on
valuable
there.
advice, yeah. Sometimes it can get a bit repetitive, so I understand why people don't follow too many people, because if something is really topical, everybody's talking about it.
Yeah.
There's only a handful of different views that are coming out of all of these posts, right? So I can get it. But, if you do it right, you can pick the right people, you can follow them, and you can learn. So yeah,
who do you follow and learn from? Who are maybe your favorite influencers that you follow on LinkedIn?
A really obvious one in my circle anyway. Like Gary Vaynerchuk. So Gary V, I'm a huge fan of his, have been for years. Simon Sinek, I think, is just a master operator of the way that the mind works. It's not necessarily this is how you sell ABC, but it's understanding how people behave, why they behave in the way they do, which I think is great. A little bit closer to home, Darren Alpert from RepView is I think is great. I think RepView as a company is great. And so if you're in this particular space, in a B2B environment, in a SaaS space, just follow RepView, because you just get so many insights from them as well, just because of the type of business that they are. And then Mick Gassay, my co-founder, regular poster on LinkedIn. And I'm not just saying that because he is my co-founder and friend, but truly valuable content comes out of him as well. And, a little plug here, but we do have our own podcast, the Revenue Revolution podcast.
Yeah, you can mention it. I'm down.
Which we, you could get the editor to cut it out if you need to, but we
leave that one in.
We post regular snippets on LinkedIn as well, and that'll expose you to more people who might be worth a follow as well.
Wicked, love that. Real good little bits of names to take down there and go and follow. Love it. And a big part of being a manager, obviously, is the people management side of things, which brings us quite nicely onto the second part of the three key topics that we were going through. The second one was around career progression. You and I had a good talk before we came live actually about this as well, that it's a really interesting topic, especially around in software sales, the whole SDR to AE transition. It's kind of seen as the holy grail that every SDR really inside 9, 12-ish months should be looking towards getting towards being an AE. If they're not, they're kicking themselves and thinking, can I go somewhere else where I can progress faster? It's just a real headache. And you said that you've successfully progressed some people and unsuccessfully moved others. So there's loads I'm sure that we can dig into here.
Yeah.
Talk to you about progression and what that's like throughout your career, how you progress people, what you look for to really say, you know what, you're ready to be an AE now.
Yeah. So I think, if we're talking specifically for SDRs and the way that they move across the business, I think it's important to be able to sit down with an individual in the first instance and understand what they want to do. Why do they want to do it? Not just professionally, but personally as well, because people are motivated by different things, right? So some people will thrive in a high pressure situation and are very, very motivated by money. Other people like the consistency of speaking to, the consistency of routine of what you're doing instead, right? And, I'm not saying it's necessarily always the case, but that might be, hey, maybe you should be a CSM. I don't know, right? But firstly, understand this. Once you start to understand this, then start to build out a plan, right? So how are we going to get you from A to B, right? And what do you firstly need to achieve from a metric perspective? Because, I do think that it needs to be on merit. I've seen instances where people have been promoted based on tenure, which I just totally disagree with. I disagree with it in its entirety. I disagree with that in its entirety. Let's just not go into it in too much detail, but I do. And I think that you should be promoted on metrics. So you need to be able to attain specific results to begin with. Once you've done that and you're well on the way to be able to doing this regularly for the agreed period of time, we need to start thinking about a couple of things. One is, okay, what skills do you have that are going to be transferable to the role that you want to do? So that, this might be from SDR to AE, it might be SDR to CSM, it might be SDR to marketing. I was speaking to someone the other day who said they moved somebody into their team. They're in RevOps. They moved somebody into their RevOps team from an SDR position, right? So it's
I mean,
not
ultimately,
necessarily the
RevOps
case.
probably have a pretty big impact on the SDR for role, right? So it's good to have someone who actually is at the end of the line of what RevOps is up to.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So it's the point I'm making is it's not necessarily always the case that it's linear like this, where you just go from SDR to AE. You can go in any direction you want to, and I don't think people should limit themselves to just one view. Go as an SDR. Typically, a lot of the time, you're new to the workplace as well. You get graduates who come in. Go and experience other parts of the business. Go to speak to people about what they're doing within the business. Learn what other functions in the business do, because you may find that something else is going to interest you as well.
Yeah.
But going back to what I was saying before, so what you want to do,
right.
or once you've got the metrics, is right. What skills do you have that are transferable to get to the role that you want to get to, and where are the gaps? Right.
Yeah.
Now you need to start to build a plan as to how you can address these gaps. Right, and that might be, sales coaching one-on-one if we're going from SDR to AE. And sales coaching can take many different formats. It can be specific to the company you work at. Start to learn our product better. So, as an SDR, maybe you should be sitting on more calls. Pick a deal or two every month that you want to follow through from first call through to close, whether it's close won or close loss. And then speak to the AE about it. Speak about your ideas. Why did we win that deal? Why did we lose that deal? What could we have done different, and so forth. But then the other is sales coaching in a classroom. What are different sales methodologies? How do you incorporate these into a deal? How do you ask good questions? How do you actively listen? How do you manage a sales process, outside of just the methodology? So there are different ways in which you can upskill people. And then the third is ensuring the handover is correct. And the reason that's really important, in particular when we talk about an SDR, is, for me, I think the SDR function is the most important function within the business, because you ultimately feed the top of the funnel, right? Which is, anything you're putting in the top of the funnel is ultimately paying the bills, right? If you're not putting that at the top of the funnel, you're not keeping the lights on in the office, right? That's what it boils down to. And so you need to make sure that handover is correct. When an SDR moves out of that SDR role, the likelihood is they're moving into a role if it's within the existing business, because they're a top performer. If they just move, there's going to be a reduction in the number of new opportunities that are coming in at the top of the funnel.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure the handover is right as well. And that can happen in a couple of ways. It might be, hey, you do a hybrid role first, you backfill, or it could be you backfill the position in combination with that. And then there's, a working together. So a little bit of extra work for that SDR at that given period of time, where you're doing a hybrid role, but you're also hand-holding essentially the new starter to get them up to speed and get them to where you need to get them to as well. And if you can do all of those successfully, then I think you do it well.
There's so much we can unpack there as well. That's a really good overview, right? But we can get tactical on a couple of areas.
Yeah.
When you're talking about metric-based promotion as well, obviously it's one criteria of many for someone to even be up for promotion as well.
Yeah.
What sort of things have you looked at historically? What's your expectation been of SDRs to even get into a conversation about promotion? Have they got to hit a target of X many demos for X many months in a row? What did it look like for you?
So it's twofold. Ultimately, the most important one for me for an SDR is that they are booking the number of qualified meetings that they should. But by a qualified meeting, it means that an AE is actually validated that this is a qualifying opportunity. If you're just talking about booking demos, sometimes it becomes vanity numbers. You're booking in demos that are not necessarily shouldn't have been there to begin with. So
booking your nan in for a demo of your platform, not really the one,
is
it?
You're calling your best mate and saying, "Hey, I just really need you to take this demo. I'm going to get promoted." Right. So make sure they're qualifying meetings is really important to me. And then to a degree, but not necessarily an absolute for me, is also the input in terms of their metrics as well. So, how many people they put into sequence, how many dials they make, things like this. It's not necessary. And the reason I say it's not an absolute is because ultimately the most important thing is the number that you hit in terms of qualified meetings for me as an SDR. So I don't really care how they get there. I just want them to get there. And if you're doing it consistently, so, keep in mind, you're not going to be promoted after doing it for 1 or 2 months. You're doing it for a considerable period of time, then you obviously know what you're doing. And then the third thing and final thing for me is the ability to be someone who's happy to share and reapply. A team player, you don't keep your success to yourself. You realize that by somebody else coming up, it doesn't bring you down. You can come up together, and so ensure that you're demonstrated that as well as being that top performing SDR, you're also ensuring that you're showing everyone else how to do that too.
And you're talking about sort of raising the whole team there, moving people up. That begs a really, probably a difficult question. I imagine that a lot of managers face at some point is you've got an SDR who's doing well, hitting targets, showing really good growth, but fundamentally the business doesn't have a need for another AE to come in seat at that time. And you're kind of saying to them, look, you're just going to have to wait. And they're like, well, look, how long am I waiting here? Because I'm at a level where I'm ready to be an AE. You can't move me up. I'm going to go elsewhere. You're then potentially losing one of your top performing SDRs. How have you historically handled that kind of situation?
Yeah, it happens and it's tough. It is really tough, actually. For me, I think there's a couple of things. Have a conversation about where those interests lie. Is it a genuine case that they just want to be an AE? Maybe they'd be open to being something else. Sorry. Maybe they'd be open to moving into a different position as well if it's interesting and it works for everybody. And then the other is sitting down and being open about it. You need to look at the wider business, right? So yes, you're moving someone up, but there needs to be space to fill up. And the way to fill that space is one of two ways. Either if we're talking about SDR to AE, either that AE is already moved on or looking to move on. So either they're going to leave the company or they are going to move into another position within the company. Or things are going really well and you're expanding the team. There's a requirement to have an additional AE. If you can't tick any of those boxes, unfortunately, it is a case that, you need to have an honest conversation with them about it. In my opinion, at least, is, we can continue to work at upskilling you. We can give you additional projects to do. If there's a way in which we're able to satisfy the need that they have, it might be, I want extra responsibility. It could equally be, I want extra money, right? Yeah. So understanding what that is, right, and seeing if you can fulfill that in a different way if you're not able to tick those other two boxes. But it's tough. I've had people move on before, and there's just literally nothing you could do about it, unfortunately. If I could have, I would have. And the person I'm thinking about who moved on literally said to me, I know you would have done it if you could. So, unfortunately, my hands were tied.
So literally, yeah. So I guess you've got to have peace for yourself in that way, knowing that you couldn't really have done anything about it in that case, and therefore it's okay.
And it wouldn't make sense.
It's not really okay, but you get it.
Yeah, I don't think you should just move people up because they're great. There needs to be a requirement for it.
Absolutely.
As well as
it's got to be the merriment of like business need and individuals' potential or readiness to move into that role, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
Love it. Cool. Some really good stuff inside there as well. We'll move on to the next area then, which is the hot topic, which I love this one because I think it's such a debate that I see between different sales leaders around AE self-sourcing. Some are saying, yep, they should still be picking up the phone once they've been promoted and still be booking in meetings. After all, they used to be SDRs. Some are saying, look, their skill set is different now. It's on about negotiating, it's deal management, it's stakeholder management. It's just a whole different world and you can't do both at the same time. And you see this in some roles where there are like 360 AEs where they have this period of a lot of prospecting because their pipeline's empty. Pipeline gets full, they work all the deals, they stop prospecting, pipeline gets empty again, and they're stuck on this roller coaster the whole time of trying to make sure there's enough pipe, but also making sure they have the time to move things forward. So what's your take? Do you think AEs should do self-sourcing or do you think they shouldn't?
I'd flip that a little bit. I think AEs should be busy. And what I mean by busy is not being busy for the sake of it. You want AEs to be selling and working deals. That's primarily the two things you want them to be doing. And if their calendar is not full with these activities, the only way to get it full with these activities is to fill the top of the funnel. And so based on that, I think if there's a requirement that the calendars are not full, you should be self-prospecting. Because why wouldn't you? Ultimately, as an AE, you want to get paid. Most AEs I know are motivated by money, right? Yeah. And they want to make as much money as they can. And if you don't have deals within your pipe, you will not make money. And so why wouldn't you do it? It's in your own interest to do it. And if somebody said to me once that having the skill set of an SDR for an AE should be like being able to turn a tap on and off. Turn it on when you need it. And then when you no longer need it, turn it off again. But know that you'll have to turn it on again.
Yeah,
That's ultimately
it's
where we are
like
now.
supplementary pipeline to what you've been provided by marketing, by
Yeah,
partnerships, by your SDR team, whatever it might be, right? And I guess from the way I hear it, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds
yeah,
like you're saying, look, if my AEs have got like 4 or 5 meetings in every single day, 5 days a week, I have no expectation that you'll do prospecting. I'm not going to force a
you don't
prospecting
need to.
block on you between 10 and 12 on a Wednesday morning, for example. But
Mhm.
equally, if you know they've got no meetings on a Wednesday morning, you're saying, look, guys, realistically, you should know what you should be doing during this time. I shouldn't have to tell you. Is that how you've approached it historically?
Yeah. So in terms of the number of 45 demos, it really just depends on what their target is and what they're trying to hit. So ultimately, you want to work backward from this. And you need to make sure, as an AE, I think ultimately, when I was an AE, I would always work backwards. I'd do my pipeline metrics based on the number I need to achieve, my win-loss ratio, the average deal size. I won't bore you with all the details, but it goes through to the number of deals you ultimately need in order to be able to hit that target. Every AE that I've had in my team works in the same way because it's the first thing I'll tell them. Like, you need to be able to tell me if you have enough to feed your pipe or not. And, ultimately I check as well, but I want them to be able to understand if they have enough or not. And so if you do this and you do not have enough, right? Ultimately, as an AE, you want the business to provide for you, but obviously the business is trying, but the buck stops with you, right? You need to be able to fill the
You
top of
own
your
that
funnel.
number, right?
You own that number. That's your number.
Mm.
You have to get to that number. So sitting there saying, I don't have enough deals in the funnel, and then actually also not doing anything to remedy that, does not bode well for you as an individual. If anything, what you want to do is say, right, I don't have enough. This is what I'm going to do to get to there. Right. And, I've had I had an AE in my last team who was an amazing AE and actually was, at his time when he was an SDR, was also the best SDR we had globally. And as soon as he became an AE, so I don't want to prospect anymore. Right.
We have
And
an AE just like that.
yeah. And I went, look,
know exactly what you mean.
I said, I get it. Right. So why would I do that? And he had been an SDR for about 18 months, I think. So he's like, I've done this for 18 months. Like, I'm moving to an AE, so I don't need to do it. Ultimately, he had to do it because I was like, when you break it down to them and say, look, the number is actually your number, right? Would you say that you have enough here to be able to hit the number? If you do, show me the math, right? Show me the number of deals you have with your close one ratio, the average deal size, and show me that you will hit your number. Because if you can't show me that, then you're not going to prospect, fine. But show me how you're going to get to your number. Put a plan together and show me. And if you can
it's not even you sitting there telling them and saying you have to prospect. It's saying, look, I'm just going to show you the maths here. Yeah, show me how you're going to do it. You tell me, right?
Yeah. If you can come to me and say, this is how I'm going to bridge the gap, and it doesn't involve prospecting and it's viable, fine. I just want the number, right? I just need the number. So it doesn't matter to me how you get there, right? As long as I believe that the plan you're showing me is going to get you there, that's fine. To this day, though, nobody has been able to show me a plan outside of self-prospecting.
There needs to have at least some part of it in there.
Exactly.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to that earlier piece around managerial styles as well. It's not telling someone you have to cold call between these times. It's more saying, as you said, show me how you're going to get to this number. That's your target. I'm here to help you hit it, but show me how you're going to do it. And if they can't really prove it, then you're saying, well, what have you got to be doing then to make sure you hit it? And as you said, the answer pretty much always is prospecting.
Yeah, and I'm always willing to bounce ideas. Like I work for my team; they don't work for me, right? I'm there to bounce ideas off, speak about whatever we need to get us to where we need to get to. So I'm open. It's just ultimately always involves an element of self-prospecting. There's no other way.
I love that. Absolutely love it. Awesome. Really interesting topic. I could go on about that forever because I said some people love it, some people hate it. It really is kind of like Marmite, just splitting up the sales leadership world. It feels at the best of times. Let's go on to one of the more fun parts. I always love asking about this as well. I always love hearing stories because people always remember stories. So give me a story that you love, something you're really proud of, whether it's you or someone else. And then I want to hear a horror story, something that's gone horribly wrong that hopefully you managed to resolve. But I'd just love to hear of something else on the other side of the spectrum there about your career.
All right, let's start with the horror story, I guess.
All right,
so we can go back to a good note as fast as possible. So I think a horror story for me would be back when I was an AE. I had a deal which I was working which I was banking on for a specific quarter. Well, I don't remember when it was, what period it was, but for a specific quarter, I had buy-in from the CTO, the COO, like pretty much all of the C-suite. Right. Then we had a closed plan. We started the legal process. We fully understood how we were going to get to signature. And what I tend to do is I put a work in progress meeting every week. From when I get to a specific stage in the deal, if it makes sense, I'll say, let's put a work in progress. We can move it if we don't need it, right? But it's just a touch point. It's just there, just in case you have any questions, or if I have any questions. That way, everyone can work in the same direction, and we can make sure you can realize the value of what you're buying as soon as possible, which is great for everybody. And so I got on one of these calls, and he said, hey, we're going to have to pump the brakes a little bit. Oh, what's happened? I can't tell you. But we're just going to have to push it by 6 months. I was like, 6 months? That's a long time. All right. So, and actually I was an AE at the time. I said, okay, but you can't tell me why. They go, look, we've loved everything you've done for us. We've loved the conversations. We see the value in everything. I just can't speak, but there's something bigger going on at the moment. So I had a sense that it's probably, either they're looking to acquire a business or they're getting acquired. It's probably the only thing that you couldn't really talk about in this instance. So I assumed it was going to be one of those things. So, at the end, there was nothing I could do with that. So I was like, okay, cool. So I guess I'm just going to have to miss my number that quarter because I was counting on it, right? So unfortunately, I did. Anyway, I kicked it down the road 6 months, as you did, as I had to. And then we moved the catch up to, I think it was like every 2 months, just to check in, make sure we're still going to be okay. By this time, I actually moved into a leadership role as well. But, I held on to the opportunity.
Still wanted to get that deal over the line. It was in the back of your mind, rent free.
Yeah. So, exactly. So, the time came, all right, hey, we need to push it a couple of weeks. Like, okay. But honestly, I can tell you everything in 2 weeks. Get on the call in 2 weeks. We've been acquired. Basically, the company that acquired us, they said they just need to look at a few things. So give us 2 more weeks. All right, cool. Get on the call too. They've got tech they'd rather we use first before we do anything else. And so what was a nightmare over here is I obviously waited pretty much, I worked this deal for 9 months, I'd like to think, and got to zero out of it. So it wasn't the best. It was a little bit out of my hands, but it was ultimately very, very disappointing as well.
Once that acquisition rolls on through, you are at their mercy then, basically, because that company does not want to be rattling any cages too soon, do they?
No, exactly. Which I get. It was just just wasn't a good look. And people still tease me about that deal to this day, man. So
you're never getting away from it, mate. Never getting away
from that one. Is that deal that they're signing anytime soon? I'm like, probably not. No.
That one's done. It's gone. Sadly, as the tear rolls down your cheek. Take us to the other side of the hill then. What's the happy story or something you're really proud of?
I think that when you work in sales the way we do, or have a career in sales the way we do, it's full of moments. It's full of a lot of downs, right, and a lot of ups as well. It is a roller coaster.
It's a roller coaster.
Overall, there's nothing you can do about it, right? And so there's quite a few to pick from, to be honest. But I think one of the best moments for me was probably an SDR that I'd moved into an AE who then went, it's not a moment, it's over a period of time, but he moved from being an SDR to the top SDR through to an AE, through globally being our top AE as well, which was great. And he went from having a lot of hand-holding from me on deals, because I don't know why, he probably didn't have the confidence to do things himself, although he's very capable, to actually being able to just go full steam ahead himself, barely checking in. Really, if anything, I'd have to chase him up for updates because he was just plowing through things and getting things done. So that was a proud moment for me, because it was taking somebody over a period of years from, probably a very important role, but nonetheless a little bit more junior than where he ended up, through to where he is now. And that's great.
Nice. Love that. I think whenever I ask most sales leaders for a story, it normally involves someone else going on a journey of some kind rather than themselves. Like, they never really pause to go, it's about my deal that I won. It always comes down to that feeling of seeing someone else grow, which is always lovely to see. Yeah. Awesome. Right. Quick fire round. I've already asked one of these questions, so we've kind of cheated with this one. We've got less in there. But a few questions that I want you to ask as shortly and quickly as you can. Favorite sales book to read?
Got a few. The Challenger Sale.
Take 2 or 3 if you want.
Not necessarily a sales book, but Start With Why. Simon Sinek is really good. And Never Split the Difference. I think it's great.
I always hear that book recommended. Always.
It's a great book. It's a great book.
Second question would have been your favorite LinkedIn influencers, but you've already told us that list.
Done that one.
A top tip for aspiring managers, people who are looking to become managers in the next year or so.
Get buy-in. Sorry, get buy-in from your senior stakeholders on a timeline and a plan to get you to where you are. And that plan is, I won't repeat it, but what I said before about understanding the skill set, where the gaps, skill set required, where the gaps are, and how you're going to fill those gaps as well along that timeline through to the position of management. I think it's extremely important.
Same as de-risking a deal. It's like de-risking a promotion, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Just treat everything like that.
Love it. Top tip for current managers, those that maybe been in the role for 12, 18 months.
Lead by example. Don't ask anyone to do anything you're not willing to do yourself, especially right now, because I hear so many stories about companies who are struggling on the new business side, who are behind numbers. Don't just sit there and what did you call it? A dashboard manager. Don't be a dashboard manager. Get in the weeds with your team, and do what they're doing, right? Show them that you're willing to do it. That would be my tip.
Your leader, love it. And then the third and final one, which you maybe guess where this is going, a top tip for sales leaders.
Be very data-led in your decisions, especially right now. Take as much emotion as you can out of what you're doing. Data. Don't make any decision without it.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And then final thing to wrap up on then is where can people find you? Anything you want to plug or mention? You've already mentioned your podcast. We've heard about Jointflows. Anything else you want to throw in?
We've got the podcast. We've got Jointflows. That's really it, to be honest. I'm just a normal folk. I don't really have much to talk about other than that. So just get on those.
Do you post on LinkedIn very often?
I do, yeah. Follow me on LinkedIn, Hitesh Kapadia. Follow Jointflows on LinkedIn. Follow Mick Gosset on LinkedIn, my co-founder as well. And yeah, that's about it.
Amazing. Hitesh, really enjoyed that, mate. Thank you. Really good going through those topics earlier on as well and hearing the story. So thank you for that and look forward to this one going live.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on. I had a good time. Thank you.